This is scene 3, and I would like to go back and talk a little bit about my ancestors. My cousin Diane Newberry and cousin Hank Rogers have done a lot of genealogy work, and I have multiple papers about their research in my papers. But this is what I remember and know about our ancestors. On the Newberry side of our ancestors, my grandfather Henry's mother was a Rambo who married a Newberry, Elias Newberry. And Elias was a veteran of the Civil War, fighting for the Union Army, and he endured several long marches in very cold, bad weather in the service, which severely affected his health through those ordeals. And he left the Army in poor health and continued in poor health until the end of his life, when he was in his younger years of around 40 years old, which left his wife Sarah to raise 5 young boys. And so she raised those boys on a very small pension that he was given by the government for his service and his medical rehabilitation. They lived in a rural area close to Greenville, Tennessee, and I have been there and seen the cemeteries where both the Rambos and the Newberries were buried. About 10-15 years ago, my cousin Hank and other cousins on the Newberry side got together and pooled our money and rehabilitated the gravestones of several of the Newberry. My great-grandfather, great-great-grandfather tombstones had deteriorated and broken. And Hank Rogers was the primary mover and did all the work in getting the gravestones refurbished. And they are now in very good condition, sitting adjacent to the Methodist Church there in the countryside, close to Greenville. Our grandfather Henry and his cousin, as I previously mentioned, went to southwest Oklahoma when the land was opened for settlement. Also, my grandmother Exie Kernut, was her maiden name, moved from, she originally grew up and was born in Arkansas, but they moved to a little place called Pilot Point, which was close to Denton, Texas, and now is covered by Lake Texoma. But they stayed there a couple of years, and the school where Exie went was rescued, and the school, one-room school, was moved to the campus of North Texas State and still exists as a museum. So, Exie's father died at a young age, and that left her mother, Liddy, with 5 young kids, and she moved with her kids to what is now where they homesteaded, and that was only a mile to the southwest of where Henry homesteaded. And so the families were in close proximity to each other, and Burnett and Newberry families have been close ever since. So Exie was around 17 or 18 when they moved to Harmon County in the little community called Schroeder, and so that's the way she got to know Henry. And after courting for a couple of years, they were married. So Henry had to clear the land of mesquite trees, which were scattered throughout the farm area due to cattle drives coming up from South Texas, cattle being driven through the western part of Oklahoma up to Kansas to be shipped by rail to Chicago. And so that was, I'm sure, very hard work because they didn't have any mechanical power. They simply had to use their grubbing hoes and what they could do with horses and mules. The Ex's siblings settled in the county also, and one was Eva Carning, who was the cousin of Exie, who lived about a quarter mile away from Exie. On the Gould and Atterbury side, the grandfather Gould, or my great-grandfather Gould, moved from Georgia to Arkansas, and it could have been Missouri. And he lived there for several years before deciding to move to the open territory in Harmon County, and he ended up in a place that became the town of Hollis, and his was one of the first buildings in Hollis. He built a rooming and boarding house which still exists today on the main street of Hollis. That once he got settled there, he asked his son-in-law and daughter Maggie and Jack Atterbury to relocate to the town that was being built, but and it eventually became the town of Gould. They did this. Grandfather Atterbury was employed as a streetcar conductor in St. Louis. He had previously lived in Upland Missouri. That's where my mother, Burl, was born. So they moved to the future town of Gould in about 1910, and the first school in Gould was held in the Baptist church, and since they didn't have any other structures, later on they built the first brick and mortar school, which my mother attended until she graduated, and she was in the first class that graduated from when the Gould School was accredited. My father didn't go to Gould School because he was going to go to, at the time when he was going to the Schroeder School, which was built 1/2 mile north of the Newberry homestead on land donated by Henry Newberry. The school only went to the 10th grade, and at the time the Gould School wasn't accredited, so Dad and R.D. Cornutt, his cousin, which was R.D. was the son of Riley Denton Cornutt Sr., and R.D. was the junior. Riley Denton Cornutt was X's brother. So R.D. and Earl went to Mangum, and they had to live and board in Mangum to go to school the last 2 years. While Dad was there, he played violin and played bass fiddle. He had learned how to play the violin on his own. He had saved up his money and ordered the violin on a catalog and taught himself to play that. He later on became very proficient in playing the cello, and he played in some string quartets when he was in Altus in the 1960s, after he hadn't played the cello for many, many years. So Dad tells the story of when in about 1920, he and R.D. and a friend of theirs decided they were going to run away and join the Army. They were about 17 years old, and they they were going to get up early in the morning and walk from the farm to Hollis, where they would catch the train and go to where they could enlist in the Army, which was about 15 miles away. Well, on that morning that they got up early and before the parents got up, Dad wasn't feeling well, and they walked about 4 miles, and Dad just couldn't walk anymore, and they had to literally help carry him into Gould, and where they caught a ride to Hollis. Well, by this time Dad was extremely sick. He had appendicitis, and so there was a doctor in Hollis who had been a surgeon during World War I, and they took him to the surgeon's office, and he had Dad lay on a table, and he took his fist and pounded it into his abdomen where the appendix was located, which gave Dad excruciating pain, and doubled over, and the doctor said, "Yep, you got it." That was his way of diagnosing whether he had appendicitis. Well, those times they gave ether for put to sleep, and Dad says it was very crude. They used a little funnel and some gauze and put it over your nose and put you to sleep. And so, in those days, they kept you in bed after an operation of this nature, and so he was there in bed for several weeks, and he knew that he was going to really catch a hard time from his parents because of what they had done, running away. So finally, after he had recovered, he recalled his mother admonition to him. Actually said, "Earl, sometimes the good Lord just takes care of fools that can't take care of themselves." And so Dad was dreading what his father Henry was going to do. And so when he got well enough, Henry said, "Earl, I want you to come down to the barn with me." And Dad thought, "Gee, I'm gonna get a whipping for this." And they go to the barn, and he said, "Earl, don't you know that I could have got you canceled from any enlistment? You're too young to be in the Army." He said, "Now you are getting grown up, and so I want you to have this horse." And so Dad was just floored by that and really appreciated it. Granddad Henry's mother was Sarah Rambo, who became Sarah Newberry, and she came to visit Henry and Exie in 1904, in the spring of 1904, and she hadn't seen her son in about 4 or 5 years. And so she visited there for a couple of months and became very ill, and they didn't know what was wrong with her, and she died after a couple of months. She's now buried in a little cemetery where it is called Dodson, which is about 4 or 5 miles from Schroeder Community. So the Gould, Newberry, and Atterbury have a lot of history in the Harlan County area and in the Schroeder and Gould area particularly. I think that pretty well sums up some of these stories about the ancestry. I invite you to look at papers that I'm sure you can get in my papers. I think I'll go now to talking about when I went to college. As I previously mentioned, I worked my way through college as a janitor, worked as an electrician, and things weren't expensive back then. The good wage which I got was anywhere from 50 to 75 cents an hour, but you could get at the boarding house, you could get all you wanted to eat of a really good meal for 75 cents or less. And our monthly rent for a room was only about um, $15 a month. When I went to college, I spent the first semester in Cardell Hall, which was the men's dormitory, and I really didn't enjoy being in the dormitory because my roommate was an amateur radio operator by the name of Buck. His sign was Baker Uncle Charlie King, and he was always on his radio yapping and disturbing me. So after the first semester, because both John and I were working our way through school, we decided to pool our resources, and I would move in with he and his wife Wanda and young child Judy in an apartment in what they call Vet Village, which was old World War II barracks that had been converted into apartments. And the rent was $45 a month, which I helped pay John. John was a poultry major. He believed that he could make a lot of money in the poultry business once he graduated with a degree in poultry, raising big poultry farm. So more on that later, but he worked on the poultry farm, and as a result got his eggs for a penny apiece. And he and friends of his had an old garage where they raised chickens, and so that's my memory of eating there, that with John and Wanda, is we had a lot of chicken and eggs. So I stayed there for one semester with John and Wanda, and we decided that it would be best for me to find another place. One semester was enough of that. I do recall that John and a friend of his went to border Kansas and spent about $15–20 on liquor. You couldn't buy it except from a bootlegger back in those days in the 1950s, mid-50s. Couldn't legally buy liquor in Oklahoma. So anyway, I remember how disgusted Wanda was when they came back and told her they'd spent all their money on that liquor. But one of the reasons I bring that up is I was friends with the man who managed, whose father managed the maintenance of the apartment complex there for the university, and his parents went out of town, and his name was Tommy West, and Tommy says, "Max, let's get drunk." And I had never had more than one beer in my life, and so I said, "Well, what do you propose we do to get drunk?" And he says, "Well, your brother's got that gin, hasn't he?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "Well, I'll go buy a 6-pack of beer, and we'll make what they call, I think, Boilermakers." And I said, "Well, how do you do that?" He said, "Well, as I understand it, you take a couple sips out of your beer can, and to make room for the gin, and you pour the gin in to fill it up, and then you we drank the mixture of gin and beer. So we decided we'd do that. And of course, neither one of us had any experience with drinking, and we soon became very drunk. And we didn't realize that if we kept drinking, we'd get sick, which we did very shortly. And we got so sick, we both went to just laid down in the bed. And when we did that, we really got sick. We both jumped up about the same time, tried to get to the door to throw up, didn't make it, threw up on the floor, and went back to bed. We woke up the next morning to the sounds of his parents coming back early. Did we ever catch it? So I couldn't even stand to drink any gin for many, many years after that. And I didn't drink hardly any beer for quite a while after that. So I decided for my major in college that I would study engineering, because I heard that they made good money and it sounded interesting, and I was pretty decent with school, particularly math. I never studied while I was in high school to speak of. I don't ever really recall taking books home and studying, and so I didn't apply myself, but I was able to make B's and A's, and depending on my interest in the subject. So I went to college with very poor study habits, and that carried over. I goofed off, didn't really study. I crammed for tests just the night before the test and things of that nature. And so my first couple of years, grades weren't very good at all. They were mostly B's and C's. And so I finally realized later on in college that, hey, you really better buckle down and start studying. And then I started making B's and A's. So while you had to take ROTC, Reserve Officer Training Corps, for the first 2 years of your college when you went to a Oklahoma A&M college, which OSU was called Oklahoma A&M College before it was named as a university in the mid-50s. So I decided that I wanted to become a pilot, so I enlisted in the Air Force ROTC. And then after you served your first 2 years in ROTC, you no longer had to attend ROTC classes, but if you wanted to get a commission in the military service, you had to take advanced ROTC. Well, at that time, everybody was obligated to serve in the armed services if they could pass the physical and other requirements to join the service. So it was either get a commission through ROTC or go in as an enlisted man after I graduated from college. So both myself and my brother John were in the Air Force ROTC, and my brother Joe was in the Army ROTC. And we all got our commissions through the ROTC program. Both John and Joe became pilots. John flew large cargo planes, and Joe flew helicopters for medical evacuation. I thought I wanted to be a pilot, but the Air Force thought I didn't have the aptitude to be a pilot, and I think they were probably right. But they said, you've got an engineering background, and that fits in real good with meteorology. And if you'd like to be a weather forecaster, we'll send you to college for a year studying meteorology. And so I thought that sounded really neat, because my uncle, Jack Newberry, had served in the Air Force, Army Air Force, as a meteorologist. And I became interested in that. So when I graduated, I had a commission in the Air Force, and they sent me to Texas A&M for a 1-year studying of meteorology. I think I enjoyed my time at OSU, although I was always broke. I didn't date much, just 3 or 4 different times, as my memory serves me. I didn't have money to date, and for a while I didn't know how to dance and to take a girl to a date during my first couple of years. So my buddy and I, there was a lot of kids from the country at the college who had never been exposed to learning how to dance. So the college had this class you could go to at night and learn to dance. And so my buddy and I decided that we'll try that. And so, to our dismay, when we got there, it was like 90% men and 10% women. So to learn to dance, you'd have to dance with a man mostly. Well, that didn't set too well with us. So we decided we would go to this place in Tulsa called Kane's Ballroom. And it was a big dance hall, and played country music and things like that. It was well known, very big dance hall, and there would be several hundred people there, mostly singles. And so we didn't know how to dance, but we watched other people dance, and then we'd go ask a girl to dance, and we'd try out our moves. They weren't good, and so we didn't dare go back and ask the girl twice to dance. After that experience, we'd find some other girl to dance. And so after several times of doing that, we learned to, quote, dance. Not good, but we could at least call it dancing. I didn't have transportation initially other than a bicycle, and then I found what they call a whizzer motor. And a whizzer motor could be mounted in the frame of the bicycle, and you put a pulley onto the back wheel spokes, and you could then have motorized transportation. And so for about $10 I got the bicycle, and for about $15 I got the motor, and I used that to provide transportation for several years, 2 or 3 years. Um, and it was a good fun little thing to write. I used it to ride out to the clinic, which was about 3 or 4 miles from where I lived on the campus, to work there. So the I think that's pretty much what I want to capture as far as my college experience is concerned. Now, I initially enrolled in electrical engineering because I didn't know anything about what different types of engineering were at the time. But after the first year and taking an electrical engineering course, I decided this isn't for me. And by that time, I had found that there was an engineering called industrial engineering, and the college had a combination kind of degree, called it industrial engineering and management. Well, that appealed to me because I didn't want to be, quote, technically just an engineer. The idea of being a manager as well as being associated with making things appealed to me. And so I switched in my sophomore year to majoring in industrial engineering and management. And that required a course in each of the disciplines of engineering, such as kinematics and mechanisms, thermodynamics, structures, mechanisms, electrical engineering, chemical engineering, civil engineering, all types of different engineering subjects, at least in math through two courses in calculus and one course in differential equations, and I took the course in nuclear physics, and so I had a good broad background. And also I enrolled in a computer programming class, and the computer operation, this was in 1957, was in the math department at the time. They didn't have a computer school, so the math department ran the computer operation, and they first taught you to program in binary, in mathematical. So you had to actually program writing in binary language. And then we went on to use other programming language. And it was very, very basic at the time. The computer itself was about the size of a big refrigerator. But that only did the computing. You had to set it in another station to punch in holes in the cards that the computer could read. And then once you fed those cards into the computer, then the computer had just blinking lights or feedback on what was going on in the computer. Then if your program ran successfully, then the computer would put out its cards, and from that you fed it into another machine which read the cards, and that printed out the results for you. It was a very cumbersome process, but you learned the basics of what it was like to work with computers. And so that was a very interesting course. I think that pretty well covers it all. I'll stop right here and we'll take up after college.